My daughter thought she could manipulate me into leaving everything to her, but I caught her red-handed, whispering about how easy it'd be once I was gone. I tore up the papers that would have made her rich and replaced them with new ones. She didn't even get $1. What happened next was rather unbelievable. Let me tell you how everything unfolded. Before then, we share stories like this every day. If you love them, don't forget to subscribe. We are on a journey to our first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. Kindly leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We'd love to stay connected. Now let's get into the details of the story. I always considered myself a man who took pride in the life I had built, brick by brick, year by year. My name is Harold Whitman, and for as long as I can remember, I've found comfort in the quiet routines of home. Mornings spent in the garden, afternoons with a book by the fire, and evenings that ended with a warm meal and the faint murmur of the radio in the background. It wasn't a grand life by any means, but it was mine, and it suited me just fine. More than anything, I cherished the bond once shared with my daughter, Emily. She was the light in the long corridors of my life, her laughter bright and easy, her smile a balm on even the darkest days. Or at least, that was what I used to believe. Lately, though, I'd noticed a shift in her, a subtle hardening of her gaze and a sweetness to her words that rang hollow. I told myself I was imagining it, that the years had made me suspicious, but deep down, I knew something had changed. One evening, I watched her from the porch as she moved among the roses I had tended since she was a girl. The setting sun painted her face in soft gold, and for a fleeting moment, I remembered the way she used to come running to me, her hair a tangle of wild curls, her laughter bubbling over like water from a spring. But when she turned to look at me, her smile seemed different. Too careful, too measured. "You've always known how to make this garden thrive, Father," she said, her voice warm but her eyes cold. I wanted to believe it was love in her tone, not calculation. But my heart was a cautious thing, and I learned to trust its unease. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words she'd spoken felt like a dagger's edge, and I lay awake long after the house had gone still, my mind replaying every quiet moment that had led me here. It wasn't until I heard her voice through the crack of my office door that the pieces truly fell into place. She was on the phone, her tone hushed and urgent, and each word she spoke was another nail in the coffin of my illusions. She talked about the house, about my accounts, about how it would all be hers once I was gone, spoken so matter-of-factly, like I was already dead and buried in the garden she had always claimed to love. I stood there in the hallway, the wood grain of the door cold beneath my fingers, and I felt something inside me break. My daughter, my only child, saw me not as a father, not as the man who had raised her and loved her with every quiet breath of his life, but as an obstacle to be swept aside. I wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding, some slip of the tongue, but the certainty in her voice told me otherwise. When she ended the call and turned, she didn't see me. I slipped back into the shadows of the house, the air heavy with the weight of what I now knew. I spent the night at the kitchen table, the will I had spent years refining laid out in front of me like a promise I no longer knew how to keep. My pen hovered over the pages, but I couldn't bring myself to write a single word. My hand shook as I ran my fingers over her name that had once been a comfort to me and now felt like a curse. I didn't destroy the will that night. I couldn't. My heart was still tangled in the memories of her as a child, the way she used to curl up beside me with a book, her small hand tucked in mine. But I knew, even then, that everything had changed. That the girl I had loved was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. As the first light of dawn crept over the hills, I finally rose from the table, my bones aching with the weight of that long, sleepless night. I folded the will and set it aside, my mind already turning to the steps I would need to take. There was a clarity in that moment, cold and bracing, and I felt it settle deep in my chest like a vow. I was her father, and I had given her everything I had. But now, I would give her nothing she hadn't earned. I would not let her greed be the final chapter of my life. And though it broke my heart to see her for who she truly was, I knew I had to act. Because love, I had learned, doesn't mean turning a blind eye to betrayal. It means standing firm, even when the person you're standing against is the very one you once thought would never betray you. The morning after that long, sleepless night, I woke to the pale light of dawn creeping through the curtains. My hands felt heavy as I ran them over my face, as if they still carried the weight of everything I had discovered. I got up and brewed a pot of coffee, the dark, bitter scent filling the kitchen like a memory of old comforts. But there was no comfort to be found in the way the house felt then, hollow, echoing with the truth I had tried so hard not to see. I kept moving through the motions of the day because I didn't know what else to do. I went out to the garden, my refuge and my pride, and I tried to lose myself in the rhythm of pruning back the roses. My hands knew the work, the way the shears should bite clean through the stems, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I thought of Emily's words, how easy it would be once I was gone, spoken with such cold assurance. And no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the ache of her betrayal pulsed beneath my ribs with every breath. She arrived later that afternoon, her knock light and precise, the same gentle rap she had used since she was a girl. I watched her through the front window for a moment, her figure poised and so sure of herself. She had always carried herself that way, as if the world owed her a place in its center. I wanted to remember her as she had been. My little girl, running barefoot across the yard, her laughter ringing out like church bells. But I couldn't afford that kind of nostalgia anymore. When I opened the door, she stepped inside as if nothing had changed. "Father," she said, her voice warm, her smile bright. "You didn't answer my messages. I was worried about you." I studied her face, searching for the softness I had once known. But all I saw was calculation behind those honeyed words. "I've been fine, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "I've had a lot on my mind." Her smile widened just a fraction, her eyes flicking around the room as if to remind herself of all that was still mine. Everything she believed would soon be hers. "You work too hard, Father," she said lightly, brushing an invisible speck from her sleeve. "You shouldn't let these things weigh on you so much." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the solid wood beneath my palm. "Emily," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She tilted her head, a small frown tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Of course, Father. What is it?" I drew in a breath that tasted of old memories and fresh resolve. "I heard you last night," I said, "on the phone. I know what you're planning." For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Her eyes went sharp, her lips parting in surprise. But then she recovered, her expression smoothing over like water. "I don't know what you mean," she said softly, but there was a brittle edge to her voice. "I think you must have misunderstood." I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "No, Emily, I didn't misunderstand. You talked about how easy it would be to take everything once I'm gone. You talked as if I were already dead." She let out a soft laugh then, as if to dismiss my words, but her eyes didn't smile. "Father, you're tired. You've always let your imagination run away with you when you're not sleeping well." I felt something harden inside me then, something that had been growing for a long time. "I'm not imagining this," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "I've seen who you've become, Emily. I've seen what's in your heart." She straightened her shoulders, her eyes narrowing. "You're being paranoid," she said, her tone flat. "You're not well, and you're making decisions you'll regret." I let her words hang in the air, the accusation like a blade turned back on me. But I didn't flinch. "Maybe," I said softly, "but I'd rather regret the truth than live in the comfort of a lie." For a moment, she looked at me as if she didn't recognize the man standing before her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't, either. But I knew, in that quiet space between us, that I would not let her take from me what I had spent a lifetime building. When she finally spoke again, her voice was tight, her eyes cold. "You're making a mistake, Father," she said. "You'll see that soon enough." I didn't answer her. I simply watched as she turned and walked out the door, her footsteps sharp against the wooden floor. The air seemed to settle once she was gone, a heavy hush that filled the house like the calm after a storm. That night, I sat at the dining table, the will I had written for her spread out before me. My hands were steady as I tore it to pieces, the sound of the paper ripping a quiet act of defiance. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Emily would not find what she was looking for here. I gathered the scraps of paper and held them in my hands, feeling the weight of my decision settle in my bones. It was a painful thing, this cutting away of what had once been so dear. But it was also necessary, like pruning a rose to let it bloom anew. As the last light of the day slipped below the horizon, I set the torn wool aside and rose from my chair. My heart was heavy with grief, but it was also stronger than it had been in years. I had seen the truth of my daughter's heart, and though it shattered the illusions I had once held so dear, it set me free. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that might have once filled me with a quiet, easy contentment. But there was nothing simple about the way the world felt now. The air was sharp, the light too bright, as if it were shining on truths I'd spent too long trying to ignore. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee cooling in my hands, and stared out at the garden that had once been a source of peace. It was still beautiful in the early light, but I couldn't help seeing it now as a testament to all I had tried to build, everything Emily had so casually threatened to tear away. I knew what I had to do. My decision felt like a stone in my chest, heavy and solid, but it was also the only thing that made sense. I had spent my life giving and giving, never asking for anything but a little respect, a little kindness. Now I would give nothing more than what was owed, and for Emily, that meant nothing at all. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write a new will, every word an act of reclamation. My hand was steady, my mind clear as I divided what I had built over decades into bequests that felt right, that felt just. The charities that had mattered to me, places that offered shelter and kindness to those who needed it most, would be the new heirs to the fruits of my labor. My neighbors, who had stood by me with quiet support when the world felt like it was falling apart, would each receive a piece of my estate. A small acknowledgement of the loyalty they had shown without asking for anything in return. But for Emily, there would be nothing. No house, no inheritance, no keepsake to remember me by. It hurt to write her out of my life in such final terms, but it also felt like the only way to close the door she had already slammed shut with her greed. When the new will was finished, I read it over slowly, feeling a strange sort of calm settle over me. It wasn't anger that guided my pen, it was clarity. I signed it with a firm hand and tucked it into an envelope, sealing it with the quiet determination of a man who had decided he would not be used. I called my lawyer, asking him to come by later that afternoon to witness and notarize it. He didn't ask questions, just agreed in the same calm, measured tone he'd always used. When he arrived, I handed him the envelope and watched as he read through the new terms. His brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. He had known me long enough to see that my mind was set. "You're sure about this, Harold?" he asked gently, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm sure," I said. "She made her choice, and I've made mine." He nodded, his face somber but understanding. He signed the document and placed it in his briefcase, promising to file it first thing in the morning. As he left, I felt a sense of finality settle over the house, the weight of all the years I had tried to keep things whole finally lifting from my shoulders. After he was gone, I sat alone in my study, the new will safely locked away in the cabinet behind me. I let myself feel the full weight of what I had done, the finality of it, the sadness and the relief all tangled together. I thought of Emily's face, the way her smile had always seemed to light up a room when she was a child. I thought of how that same smile had become a weapon, a tool to bend me to her will. I didn't want to hate her. Even then, in the quiet of that room, I didn't want to let anger be the final note in our story. But I knew I couldn't afford to let love blind me anymore. Love, I realized, was not about surrendering everything you are. It was about knowing when to draw the line, when to say enough. And for me, that time had come. That evening, I went out to the garden and stood among the roses, the warm air carrying the faint scent of earth and bloom. I thought of all the years I had spent tending these plants, the way I had coaxed them to life with patient care. Emily had never understood that kind of love, the kind that asked nothing but gave everything. She had only seen the prize, the property, the inheritance, and I would not let her take it from me. Not because I was vindictive, but because I owed it to myself to stand my ground. As the sun set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, I felt a small, fierce sense of peace. Emily would come back. I had no doubt of that. She would try to sway me with sweet words and practice tears. But I was no longer the man who had been to her smile. I was a father, yes, but I was also a man who had learned, at last, the worth of his own dignity. I turned back to the house, the quiet evening settling around me like a prayer. The door clicked shut behind me, and in that simple sound, I heard the truth of who I was and what I stood for. Emily's smile would no longer have power here. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally breathe. Emily returned 2 days later. I heard her car pull up the gravel drive, the soft purr of the engine cutting through the summer afternoon. I stood at the window, the sun slanting across the hardwood floor in ribbons of light, and watched her step out. She moved with that same easy grace she'd always had, her chin held high, her eyes bright with purpose. It used to make me proud, that confidence. Now it felt like a warning. She knocked softly on the door, 3 measured raps that echoed in the quiet hall. I waited a moment, taking a slow breath to steady the trimmer in my hands, before I went to her. I opened the door just a crack, the chain still in place, and saw her smile bright, sweet, a little too perfect. "Father," she said, her voice low and gentle. "I've been trying to reach you." I met her gaze, feeling the weight of her performance pressing against me like the heat of the afternoon. "I know," I said simply. "I've been busy." Her smile widened, her eyes flicking over my shoulder to the house behind me. "Busy? With what? You should be resting at your age, not working yourself to the bone." I felt a flicker of irritation then, sharp and unwelcome, but I didn't let it show. "I'm doing just fine, Emily," I said quietly. "You don't need to worry about me." She shifted her weight, her expression slipping for just a moment before she caught it again. "I'm not worried," she said, her tone sweet but her eyes cold. "I'm just concerned. You know how much I care about you." I said nothing, letting the silence settle between us. She pressed her lips together, her brow knitting in a show of concern. "Father," she said finally, her voice low and coaxing, "we need to talk. About the house. About everything." I didn't move to open the door any further. "There's nothing to talk about, Emily," I said. "I know what you were planning. I heard you that night." For a heartbeat, her face went still. Then she laughed softly, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Father," she said, her voice like honey. "You misunderstood. I was just talking about the future, how to take care of things. You always worry so much." I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't misunderstand. I know what I heard. You were talking about me as if I were already gone." Her eyes flashed thin, a quick spark of anger she didn't bother to hide. "You're imagining things," she snapped. "You're getting old, and you're not thinking clearly." I felt a cold, calm certainty settle in my chest. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said quietly. "I've made my decisions, and nothing you say will change them." She stepped back, her smile gone, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You can't do this," she said, her voice low and hard. "You can't just cut me out." "I can," I said. "And I have." For a moment, she looked at me with something like disbelief, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide. Then she drew herself up, her shoulders straightening. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "You'll die alone in this house, and there won't be anyone left to care for you." I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't let it show. "I'd rather die alone with my conscience clear," I said, "than let you tear apart what I've spent my life building." She stared at me, her eyes hard and bright, and in that moment, I saw her clearly, saw the coldness that lay beneath the sweet smiles, the ambition that had hollowed out whatever love had once lived in her heart. I felt a dull ache in my chest, the weight of that realization settling deep into my bones. But I didn't waver. "I've given you enough," I said, my voice soft but steady. "And I won't give you any more." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sun glared off the metal of the door chain, casting a thin line of light across the space between us. Then she turned on her heel, her chin lifted high, and walked back down the path to her car. She didn't look back. I closed the door, the soft click of the lock like a final word. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the cool wood, feeling the echoes of our confrontation in the quiet house. My heart was heavy, but beneath the sadness was a calm I hadn't felt in years. I knew there would be talk, neighbors who would wonder what had come between us, who would listen to her version of the story and believe the worst of me. But I also knew that I had done what needed to be done. I had chosen to protect what mattered most, my peace, my dignity, my sense of who I was beyond the role of father. As the light faded and the quiet of the evening settled in, I walked out to the garden and stood among the roses, the cool breeze brushing my skin. The world felt different now, emptier, Perhaps, but also clearer. I had faced the truth, and I had not turned away. I went back inside and locked the door behind me, feeling the finality of that small act. I was alone, but I was no longer afraid of that solitude. It was mine, just as the house and the garden were mine, and I would keep them safe from anyone who thought they could take them from me. And as I sat in the quiet of the evening, the weight of my decision pressed against my chest like a prayer, a promise to myself that I would not let her greed define the rest of my days. My heart was bruised, but it was still my own, and that, I thought, would be enough. The days that followed felt strangely hushed, the house wrapped in a quiet that was both a comfort and a wound. Emily didn't come back. I suppose I had known she wouldn't. She had made her choice as surely as I had made mine, and now we stood on opposite sides of a chasm I doubted we would ever cross again. At first, the phone sat silent, as if it, too, was unsure of what to say. But soon enough, the calls began. Neighbors checking in, their voices low and careful, their questions wrapped in gentle concern. I answered when I could, but I didn't offer explanations. What was there to say? The truth was too tangled, too personal to share with anyone else. Emily, I heard, had wasted no time spinning her version of the story. At the market, in the small cafe on Main Street, she spoke of me with a kind of wounded grace that only she could muster. My father's not well, she told them, her eyes wide and solemn. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. I heard it from Mrs. Lanning, who stopped by with a jar of honey from her hives. She said you're not yourself these days, she said carefully, not meeting my gaze. I forced a smile and thanked her for the honey. Let them believe what they would. I had no interest in defending myself to people who only knew the surface of our lives. The ones who mattered, those who had shared years of quiet dinners and summer evenings under the stars, knew me better. They knew the man I was, and that was enough. Still, it wasn't easy to stand in the small town square and feel the weight of the glances, the polite but wary way people held my eye before looking away. I had lived here all my life, a fixture in the gentle hum of the town, and now I was something of a curiosity. A man who had cut off his own daughter. A man who, some whispered, must have lost his mind. I didn't let it shake me. In the early mornings, I still walked the garden paths, the earth cool and damp beneath my boots. I tended the roses with the same patient care I always had, pruning back the old wood, coaxing new life from the soil. In the quiet rhythm of that work, I found a kind of solace, proof that some things still thrived under my hand, that not everything had been tainted by the bitterness Emily had brought into my life. One afternoon, as I was deadheading the last of the summer blooms, Mrs. Foster from next door appeared at the fence. She was a small woman with a crown of white hair and eyes as sharp as tacks. She watched me for a moment, her fingers curled around the handle of the basket she always carried. "You're holding up better than most would," she said finally, her voice low and kind. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my trousers. "I don't know if I'm holding up," I admitted. "But I'm still here." She nodded, her eyes softening. "Family can cut the deepest, Harold. Don't let her take your peace too." "I won't," I said, my voice steady even as my chest tightened with old grief. "I've given her enough already." She reached over the fence then, setting the basket down with a small, decisive thump. "Apples from my tree," she said. "For your kitchen. For you." She didn't ask questions, didn't press me for details, and I was grateful for that. In her quiet support, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been searching for. Reminders that not everyone would believe Emily's lies, that the truth of who I was would outlast the shadows she had tried to cast. The hardest part was the evenings. The house seemed too still then, the hush of twilight pressing in around me like a weight. I would sit in the front room, the soft glow of the lamp pooling around me, and listen to the clock tick away the hours. There were moments, brief and searing, when I missed her. Missed the way she had once run to me with scraped knees and bright eyes, how she had curled up at my side as a child, her small hand warm in mine. But those moments passed, and I let them go like the last leaves of autumn, drifting down to be buried by the snow of what I now knew. I couldn't cling to the past, no matter how sweet the memory. The woman who had stood on my doorstep days ago wasn't that little girl anymore, and I had to stop pretending she ever would be again. Each night, before I went to bed, I would walk through the house, checking the locks, the windows, the doors. It was a small ritual, but it helped me feel secure, reminded me that this house was still mine. I would stand at the back door and look out at the dark silhouette of the garden, the roses sleeping beneath the moonlight, and I would feel a quiet sense of resolve settle in my bones. Emily's betrayal had left its mark on me. There was no denying that. But it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had stripped away the illusions I had clung to for far too long, leaving behind a truth I could finally live with. And in that truth, I found a strength I hadn't known I still possessed. I went to bed each night with the knowledge that I had chosen myself, my peace, my dignity, over the easy comfort of her lies. And though the silence of the house sometimes echoed with the ghosts of what we once were, I knew I could live with it, because it was mine. And so was the life I would build from this moment on. The weeks slipped by in a slow and steady rhythm, each day like a stone in the quiet stream of my life. The world outside kept turning, and in the stillness of my days, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known I'd been longing for. The house was mine again, filled with the quiet of my own thoughts, the hush of old memories that no longer weighed on me like chains. I spent my mornings in the garden, the air cool and crisp as the seasons began to shift. The roses were starting to fade, their bright blooms turning to gentle whispers of what they had once been. But even in their fading, I saw the beauty of endurance, the way they had rooted themselves deep into the earth, surviving the heat of summer and the weight of winter's snows. I thought of myself that way sometimes, an old man weathered by storms, still standing. Emily didn't come back. The phone no longer rang with her sweet, cajoling voice or her cold, demanding tone. It was as if she had vanished from my life as completely as I had cut her out of my will. And though a part of me still missed her, the little girl she had once been, I knew that was a ghost I would have to let go of, like so many other things. The neighbors still came by, bringing small gifts and gentle smiles. They didn't ask questions anymore, and I didn't offer explanations. The people who mattered had seen the truth of me long before Emily had tried to rewrite it. They knew that I had always been a man who kept his word, who worked with his hands and wore his heart like an old, weathered coat. They didn't need me to justify the boundaries I had drawn. Their quiet presence was enough. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee warming my hands. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and rose, the world bathed in the soft glow of twilight. I thought of all the years that had led me to this moment, the sacrifices, the small joys, the heartbreaks that had shaped the man I had become. I thought of Emily and the choice I had made to let her go, to reclaim my life from the shadow of her ambition. And I realized that though it had broken my heart to see her for who she truly was, it had also set me free. I was no longer a man trying to bend himself to someone else's will, no longer willing to trade my peace for a love that was little more than a transaction. I had chosen to stand firm, to protect the quiet dignity of the life I had built, and in that choice, I had found a strength I hadn't known I still possessed. I let my thoughts drift with the fading light, the soft murmur of crickets rising in the hush of the evening. The world felt both smaller and wider all at once. Smaller because I had let go of the weight of Emily's expectations. Wider because I could finally breathe without fear of what she might take from me next. When I finished my coffee, I went inside and locked the door behind me. The soft click of the deadbolt a promise to myself that I would no longer leave my heart open to those who saw it only as a means to their own ends. The house was warm, the lamp casting a gentle light across the old wooden floors, and I felt the quiet of it settle around me like a blanket. I sat for a while at the old oak table, running my fingers over the grain of the wood worn smooth by decades of family meals and quiet evenings. There were ghosts here, echoes of laughter and arguments, of small kindnesses and sharp words. But they didn't haunt me anymore. They were simply memories, and I could let them rest. As the night deepened, I thought about what lay ahead. I didn't know what the future would hold. No one ever really does, but I knew this much. I would face it with the same steady resolve that had carried me through a lifetime of storms. I would tend my garden, watch the seasons turn, and let the quiet of my own company be enough. I had chosen myself. I had chosen the small, Steady joys of an honest life over the empty promises of a daughter who had seen my love as currency to be spent. And though it hurt, God, it still hurt. I knew I would never regret that choice. The night pressed close against the windows, the world outside hushed and waiting. And in the quiet of that darkness, I found a small, enduring peace. Because in the end, I had given enough. And now, at last, I was free. If this story of betrayal and hard-won freedom resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more moving tales of family drama and self-discovery. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know how Harold's journey spoke to you. Thank you for listening and for walking this path with me. See you soon in the next one.